Hi everybody, and welcome back to our sixth and final session of today at Corporate Learning EMEA 2020. So we're now going to be joined by Bonnie Cheuk, Learning Agility and Learning Capability Lead at AstraZeneca. So she's going to focus on future of work, being human-centric and learning and actually unlearning in the flow of work. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Bonnie, but just a quick reminder that we do have the Q&A function. So feel free to submit your questions at any time via the Q&A widget, and we'll get to those at the end. And just a quick reminder with regards to the resource center, feel free, because some of our speakers have given you resources that you can download for future use. So please take advantage of that facility too. So without further ado, Bonnie, the floor is all yours, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Great. Hello. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be here and to have this exchange with all of you. So maybe I will start off by introducing myself. And I've been in the area of digital transformation for about 20 years, and interested in all sorts of technology to connect, communicate, and collaborate. And I've worked in multiple industries. At the same time, I'm really interested in human experience. And my doctorate research actually look at human sense making, which I'm going to talk a little bit more in the presentation today. And if you look at these two circles, I think what's in the middle is like as digital and human experience come together. I'm really curious about what's the future of work. And that's actually linked to the future of learning as well, which is relating to my current role, building learning agility capability for a large pharmaceutical company. So in the next 25 minutes or so I leave time for Q&A, I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts about the future of work and learning. And I'm going to share some paradoxes relating to how do we actually create learning agility, learning experience, and to explore what human-centric learning design mean and what might L&D need to unlearn. So feel free to join me to grab a piece of paper and a pen as we go through the discussion. You can put down some of your thoughts, and I particularly welcome your thoughts about area that you agree or disagree with me. And if we run out of time, we can continue the conversation on LinkedIn as well after the formal Q&A. So let's get started. The way I think about it is when we talk about future of work, why don't I invite you to look through the eyes of two personas. So first of all, may I ask all of you to just put yourself into the shoes of employees, not L&D, not HR, but just as a normal employees in the workforce. And I invite you in the next 10 seconds, just grab your pen, whatever that comes to your mind, and write down, or a picture. You can use a soundtrack or movie title. What do you think the future of work is going to be like? Just put it down. What is it like from an employee's perspective? Let me share with you my thoughts. First of all, you might have heard about the half-life of a skill. Things are changing so fast, and as things change very fast, whatever we've learned in the school, in the university, in the past, that may last you for the next 30 years. Unfortunately, as the pace of change and digitalization, all this is making a lot of changes in the workplace. 5 years would be, the time your knowledge and skills become obsolete. And if you're in the technology field, it may even be shorter, could be about 3 years. So the world is changing very fast. And the second trend I see about the nature of work is also becoming more unpredictable. Just ask yourself these questions. In 2 to 5 years' time, will your job be the same? Would it be changed by digitalization? Will the skills, capabilities you need the skills you have today still be relevant? Will you be performing the same task with the same people, using the same tools in the same way? Are you feeling certain or uncertain about how predictable your work is going to be? Another trend I see is like, as things change, there is a need not only for us to work in our stable team, but it's like putting capabilities from anywhere in the organization to work as a network to deliver the best value for our customers. So working as a network becomes more and more important. And talking about digitalization, the machine, the AI is going to do a lot of repetitive work, predictive work, and that means that for human beings, we are increasingly even more important to be involved in work which require human judgment, focusing on strategy, reading between the lines, figuring things out, and keep learning and growing and developing. A lot of the human skills, soft skills become also very important. Another trend I see is that very often we're no longer working in one domain, one work context. And I find it useful to draw on the Canavan framework, which is invented by Professor David Snowden. You can find out more about the model, but in a nutshell, what this model is introducing us to is that our work context has different dimension. And in the past, when the world is stable, predictable, a lot of our work falls under the clear domain. We know exactly what the answer is, and we know what's the right thing to do. And other times it can be a complicated domain. We know there's an answer, that it's answer out there, there are expertise who can guide us there. These, I would call it more predictable work. Recently, with digitization, a lot of things that's going on around us, we are coming into face more and more the complex domain. We don't have all the answers to the challenges we face. We need to figure it out together. So that's complex. And even worse is the chaotic domain. When we are thrown into chaos, we must act and make decisions now. So my question for you and us is to think about as an employee is which kind of work context do you work in? You probably don't just work in one context. And how often do you need to shift between this context? So these are some of the trends I see. If that is the future of work, then let me now ask you to wear the other hat through the eyes of the L&D as L&D professionals. As work is becoming more unpredictable, how do you actually prepare the workforce for the future of work? Have a think. What have you been doing? What assumption have you been making about the future of work? So a lot of times I would argue that a lot of times we have been operating under the assumption that the world is stable, the work is clear, and the context is predictable. And with that assumption, we can define learning needs. We can deliver learning solutions with clear learning objectives, spelling out the why, what, how, probably providing clear standard operating procedures, methodologies, templates, checklists, and we can engage learners with games, activities, sharing all these good practice, best practices. And the learning outcome is recall and follow best practice, maximize the knowledge transfer because it's good for you, minimize deviance, risk, ensure compliance, make sure our work is predictable. It is all good and in a stable world. And therefore, L&D tend to focus on telling the learners what to learn, right? Whether it's a subject, skills, process, tools, or standards, and inviting learners to practice and do the right things. And you may be doing this via face-to-face session or increasingly online and hybrid learning. What if work becomes unpredictable? And that's a question that I've been asking a lot myself about. And when we assume that work is unpredictable, how do we empower learning at work? And this really changed the dynamic. We need to accept that learning needs change quickly, maybe too quickly. By the time you design the learning program, the learning needs might have changed. And in terms of delivering learning solutions, we need to accept that that's no right answer. A lot is done by trial and error. Failure is part of the learning. Status quo and rules can be broken. Inclusion and diversity of thoughts is important, and sharing experiences that include successes and failures, not necessary best practices, because those best practices do not exist in a complex world that is full of uncertainty. And what's good learning outcomes? To me, it's about situational awareness. It's knowing that we have shifted from a predictable world into an unpredictable world, and therefore new tools and new approaches needs to be in place to actually enable learning. And good outcomes mean flexibility, being agile, and open to change. And in this unpredictable world, I think L&D needs to redefine learning. we need to focus on building learning agility capability. And there are different shades of the way it's being described. Some people call it, we need business agility. We need to be agile, innovative. We need to have the change readiness for the organization. Or we need to think about working in a collaborative, networked way. So these are the different things. In terms of unlearning, this is something that L&D need to think about. How do we actually empower learning at work? What is quite clear to me is that if we still assume that we can teach the learners what exactly they need to learn and ask them to practice and do the right things, that wouldn't fit nicely into this domain we're talking about. So what's learning agility in the first place? Just a quick definition, two quick definitions to share with you. One is knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. So by default, you are in a complex, unstable work context. The other definition that I have created for my organization is it is actually very human. We start with people knowing that they have hopes, fears, dreams, struggles as they need to handle complexity. And learning agility is made up of two parts. One is the ability and willingness to learn. But secondly, is to be able to proactively apply that learning in the flow of work under different situations. That means sometimes it's predictable situation, other times it's actually unpredictable, unstable situation. So, and as I think about this in my role as the global capability lead for learning agility, I wonder, how am I going to teach and help or empower people to build learning agility capability? And I faced three paradoxes, which I like to share with you to set the context. And the first paradox is, if learning agility is all about work is becoming unpredictable, unstable, and therefore we need to try and experiment and challenge the status quo. But if the way we teach learning agility is a traditional way of, do what I teach you, follow what I say, trust the status quo, trust me as your teacher, learn more, how am I going to equip our colleagues with the learning agility capability? So that's the first paradox. The second one is, who actually decide what is best that the learners need to learn? On one hand, learning agility actually invite the learners to be self-directed learners, to think on the feet when they face a situation, to figure out what they need to do. But if L&D approach learning agility and design the experience, assuming that let me curate the best pathway for you, let me tell you exactly what's the order that you need to go through, let me tell you exactly what you're going to learn, and this is the exact outcome. I wonder whether the learners are given the experience to learn to be self-directed learners. And finally, you hear about learning and unlearning. And on one hand, so from the L&D perspective, we want people to learn more about learning agility, right? To learn the skills, learn the capabilities. On the other hand, learning agility also implies that the learners need to unlearn, need to let go of some of the things they have learned in the past. So if you are the learner, you'll probably be wondering, so do you want me to learn or do you want me to unlearn? Do you want me to build both capabilities, or are you trying to stick more things in my head? So these are the three paradoxes that I face myself as I think about how do I actually design learning agility solutions or experiences for our learners. So I think there's a way to resolve the paradox, and it's to be human-centric, to look through the eyes of people as human beings. And what I mean is that by human-centric, I don't just mean empowering the workforce to learn anytime, anywhere, or that they can easily access online and blended learning, or to invite them to give some feedback. I don't mean that. I mean to challenge my own assumptions and challenge yours as well, to think about when we teach learning agility, do learning and development professionals assume that we should decide what is best for the learners, what they should learn and how should they apply? Or can we give the power to the learners to allow them to actually build the capability to think for themselves? I think that's the assumption that I am challenging when I introduce the concept of being human-centric. So we need to design learning experience when the learners have to navigate the ambiguity, not being told, not being spoon-fed, not being, designed for them. So how do we do that? So I've been trying to figure this out this year, and have been doing a lot of experiments and pilot. And from my doctorate research, I am informed and influenced by Dervin's sense-making methodology. She has been spending more than 40 years conducting research in a wider variety of areas, just studying human sense-making. How do people actually make sense of the world? What are their needs? What is being human beings really like? So I find it fascinating. I like to draw on the theories and the metaphor to inform my own thinking. So let me share in a nutshell some of the highlights of the Dervin's sense-making methodology. When we talk about being human, first of all, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Squiggly. Mr. Squiggly is like you and me. Mr. Squiggly comes with our dreams, our muddles, our needs, our obligations, our struggles. So it's multidimensional. And Mr. Squiggly experienced the world around us with 6 H's. We use our head, but not just our head. So we're analytical, but we also use our heart. We use our hands to practice. We carry with us our habit. We work in a power structure, which I call hegemony here. And we live and work and learn in our context. That's the habitus. So all this actually influence how we experience the world around us. And what does being human really mean? Actually, as human beings, we keep moving forward. There's a timeline, right? We can't control that. We just keep moving forward. The time just moves on. We are perfect and sometimes imperfect. We sometimes are flexible. We want to change. Other times, we are just inflexible. I don't want to change. And a lot of times, we just need to muddle through. That is just how being human means. And this is a metaphor which I like to think about how human beings keep moving forward. So this is Mr. Squiggly carrying the umbrella, and most of the time you're quite happy walking along your path, right? Whether it's your working life or even personal life. But sometimes you see a gap, right? You don't know what's going on and you want to figure that out. But how do you do that? So you try to seek help and support and enabled by services or resources, and you try to build the bridge to keep moving forward. And that's how human beings, how we live, how we get on with our life. What sense-making, how is this important to me is because it gives me a framework, a holistic framework to think about how human beings deal with complexity or deal with the gaps. And when we face a gap, to Mr. Squiggly, you can give him all the best practices. You can tell him what's the right answer. But the reality is this is a gap to him in that context. And that's no perfect answer. So he is carrying with him the assumptions, the belief, the past experience to see the situation. He has questions and muddles and confusion in his head. And he's also constrained. Look at the umbrella he's carrying. He's constrained by the context. He may be working in a particular work environment, working with a particular set of people or the boss, or maybe constrained by the systems that he's in. So all these actually influence in terms of what he needs and how he wants to move forward. And in terms of how to build the bridge, he may be looking for facts, evidence, data, but he may also be looking for emotional support, feelings, sharing of stories from other people. Particularly, remember, we're talking about a world of complexity where things are not clear, where the perfect answers is not there. So he's actually bringing a lot to make sense of the situation. And this metaphor is at the heart of being human-centric, at the heart of Dervin's sense-making methodology. And what is really interesting is not just a solo exercise, because when things are complex, actually different people will see things in a different way. So you and me may be looking at the same situation, but I will see it in a very different way from how you're seeing it. So you may be seeing an old lady, or you may be seeing a young lady here, right? And who's right, who's wrong when it's complex? We all bring with us our views and our understanding. So therefore, dialogue amongst the different learners are actually very important, and the diversity of viewpoints very important. So in a nutshell, just to very quickly summarize, what science making is reminding me is that if we assume that work is predictable, learning will focus on empowering this human being to be the perfect human being, to adopt all the good practice, to do all the right thing, don't fall down, walk on the nice path, keep going. I will support you, make sure that it is, just don't fall, just keep going. Whereas science making is reminded us that is only partial human experience. To be human, there's also a part that we need to face gaps. And I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about learning agility. Work is unpredictable, so people need to recognize that it is normal to face challenges, to face the gaps, and we're not perfect. And when we face the gap, when we don't have the answer, we can support one another to muddle through, to make sense of it, to find a way forward in any situation. So with that sense-making methodology, I've tested a lot of ideas this year, and I asked myself, what might learning and development need to unlearn to build learning agility capability? So I'm just going to share with you some of my thinking, some of my experiment this year. So to me, learning agility, it does not start from L&D, defining and deciding this is what you need to learn, this is how you should be doing it, this is your structure pathway. Learning agility is very personal. Start with the individual. Invite the person to think about their dreams, their goals, their struggles, their needs, and how they're going to fulfill the dreams. Invite them to talk about the challenges. And instead of doing an objective an assessment of how good you are, I invite the learners, the employees to think about for themselves. Just using a set of questions, something like this, to ask them to think about where am I today and where do I want to develop, which are the area I want to grow. So it's not in particular order, but get them to think about the different aspects, and it's based on their self-assessment and self-awareness. The other thing I try doing is to invite people to spend time, even if it's 5 minutes, some people take longer, some people do it as a team exercise, to reflect on just what have you learned in the past 4 weeks. Get them to self-reflect. And learning agility, to me, also invites L&D to redefine learning. So learning is not just about giving people the formal education, the good practices, the must-do, the checklist. When things become uncertain, when the answers are unknown, it is also important for the learners to be exposed to others, because there are different assumptions, different past experience, different way to look at the situation, different gaps that they see, different help they need, and different constraints that they face. So by allowing and empowering the learners to actually discuss these different diversity of thoughts, allowing the themes to agree to common themes and also diverging themes to come through, it is part of the sense making. The other piece is actually about learning through experience. And what do I mean by learning through experience? As you actually learn, you start to, for the first time, build those boulders, the bridges, to actually move forward. And sometimes you might fall down. Some of these boulders may not fit. And that is fine. That is part of the learning, and that is part of the experience as well. So as I mentioned, that therefore it's very important to actually create learning experience, to allow the learners to actually explore different perspectives, including contradictions, right? So these are the questions I tend to use a lot, and it's informed by sense-making methodology. Ask people to both self-reflect, share, but also listen careful to one another. What are those struggles, muddles? What do people find helpful, not helpful? Are there power issues? Are there things that you are constrained and you're not allowed, or you feel you are now not allowed to speak up? Encourage those, make them surface. And we also encourage colleagues to think about how this, hearing what other people have said, think about deeply, how does that connect with you, with your function? And if you have a magic wand, what would you wish for? Here's another example. If you are talking about hosting meetings, right? In the meeting, how do you also ensure the diversity of viewpoints to emerge? So in my company, we are introducing this meeting of minds where we invite colleagues to share, to play different roles in a meeting. And the purpose is to bring out the diversity of thoughts. So encourage people to be vocalizer. So have a person to say what other people might be thinking, but may not be, saying out loud. So have the vocalizer. Have someone to be the challenger. Offer constructive criticism to test the group thinking. Have someone to be the navigator to bring the discussion back on track. Have someone to be the engager to encourage participation for everyone. And ideally, if it's a good meeting, you have contributors who actually are all actively participating. The point is, you want to kind of build in the ritual to allow the diversity of thoughts, to allow the agreeing to disagree to happen. And all this actually help the day-to-day learning. Another point to make is it's not just about working within your team. We talk about network way of working. So learning agility actually invite your colleagues to think about how to make sense of it all together, tapping into the broader network beyond your team or even the external network. So in a nutshell, what I've been thinking and experimenting is like when I am helping the organization and the learners to build learning agility capability, I'm actually introducing them to practice 5 groups of work habits. And these work habits, as you can see, is about self-awareness as a team or individual. It's about innovation and growth mindset. It's about inclusive meeting and collaboration. It's about giving the psychological safety to encourage people to speak up, to give coaching and feedback to one another. It's about learning and sharing as the network. So these 5 groups of work habits are important because they can be practiced and applied in any work context. It's not forced in a particular order. These habits actually build in capabilities. What's really great about them is like these habits allow you to learn, build new habits, but also to break habits as well. So it's built in. And therefore, by practicing those, it actually creates the agency for change from the individual. And these work habits, when they form part of the DNA in your organization, in terms of how work gets done, day in and day out, we're truly talking about in the flow of work. How when people face complexity, how when they face unpredictable work contexts, these become the DNA in terms of how they function. So what I've done is in terms of the to bring these habits to life. So for one whole quarter, 3 months, I invite people from across the business to come together, come to the water cooler session. They practice these habits together. And during these just 60-minute sessions, people come to have moment of self-reflection, but as a group, in breakout groups, they also support one another through peer-to-peer coaching, discussion, practicing proactive listening, practicing constructive feedback, ritualize dissent, get people to challenge one another, and make it normal to do that. Right, so people acquire these habits, and at the end of each session, we ask the colleagues, what are the biggest takeaway, and that you can share with the whole company. So they're also practicing how to actually share their learning with the broader organization. And in addition to that, I've also been experimenting something called learning out loud circles. I invite colleagues to form groups of 4 or 5 people. They come together for 4 weeks. Each week they spend 1 hour together. They self-direct their learning. They think about what's important that these 4 people want to learn and grow together. And they practice a lot of the habits that I shared earlier. So in a nutshell, the human-centric design that I've been experimenting with, it's very much focused on the learner's experience, put the learners at the center. Using the sense-making methodology, accepting that it's normal to face the gap. That's an important assumption that we explicitly call out. Provide the learners with the tools, with the habits, with the practices to think for themselves. And also encourage them to think with one another by connecting with one another. Because it is when we need to navigate ambiguity, we need to accept that we need to tap into the network. We need to embrace the diversity and inclusion of different types of thinking. We need to accept that no one is perfect because nobody knows the answer. It's complex, it's unpredictable. And therefore failure is just not yet. It's the growth mindset. And speaking up is important because then we really bring out multiple dimension, multiple perspective, And we need to offer feedback and support for one another, because it's quite scary to be navigating into the unknown. So about time to wrap up. Final thoughts, reflecting on some of my experiments, and also thinking about L&D. When I initially talk about perhaps L&D need to unlearn as well, as we develop learning agility, learning experience for our colleagues. Future of work and learning needs to be much more human-centric. And by human-centric, I mean L&D in the past, in a predictable, stable world, L&D can be the teacher. We know the answer, and the learner is the student. But when things are complex and unknown, L&D actually, we become a learner ourselves. So we learn with all the learners. We are all navigators, and when we need to find a way to support one another to do that. And those habits that I mentioned earlier, they become a way to allow people to explore the ambiguity together. So final thoughts to leave with all of you is, I think L&D need to design learning solutions that cater for both the predictable and unpredictable world. Learning agility is about building the learning muscle to operate in an increasingly unpredictable and unstable world context. However, if you are enabling the workforce in your context that is predictable, that's well-defined, that has the right answer, many existing L&D solutions still work well. So the point is, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but my reflection is that as we move into a more unpredictable environment, we do need to think about what is the right kind of learning experience design that is suitable for the work context that we are enabling, we're supporting. So I hope at this point I'm going to wrap up by inviting you to share with me what are your top 3 takeaways from this session. And I'm really curious to also learn, what do you agree or disagree with me? That will enhance my learning as well. So please feel free to connect. You can find me on LinkedIn or the sensemaking-making.org website. And I'd like to also say thank you to Dr. Brenda Dervin for her ongoing inspiration and guidance. And I hope you find her work useful to inform your thinking as well. So at this point, I'm going to, I think it's Q&A time.
Bonnie, you're so insightful, and it's genuinely a pleasure to have you here, so thank you very much. I'm going to start by kicking off, and that's with regards to any other theories that you have found, other than Derve, that apply in a complex world that we're in. Are there any others that you can relate to for me?
Yes, I think the other one I briefly mentioned is the Carnarvon framework. Yeah, and that is from David Snowden. And he has been doing complexity work. He calls it anthro complexity, and he's talking about human systems and how we can actually, as a human system, how do we actually deal with complexity? So a lot of work. Search for his name, David Snowden. You can find it on Cognitive Edge as well. A lot of work has been thinking about it for like 20 plus years.
Sure. Now I want to move on to the water cooler sessions, because these are super cool, but actually really important. And so first I want to ask with regards to the topic for discussion for the water cooler session. Is that something pre-assigned? Is that free flowing? And equally, just to kind of back up that question, how do you get the leadership within that water cooler 60-minute coaching? So double-loaded question there, Bonnie.
I will try. So the water cooler, it was on the slide, so I should have actually called them out. So for the water cooler,
I'm going to bring it back. Hang on 2 seconds.
Oh, perfect. If you can bring that back, you can see the slides that our learning workout themes, it's all together, you see 10 weeks. Each week come with a theme, but all the themes are informed to the 5 groups of work habits that I talk about. So people come in, they will experience that theme, they will have discussion, but they will also practice. The point is, that's very little lecture, maybe 2 minutes just to set the scene. The rest is about experiential. So colleagues come from all parts of the business, from senior to junior staff. So it's actually it's also in the spirit of learning from the diverse network. Whereas the learning out loud circles, they are more fluid. people can choose to come together and they can pick not only these topics, they can pick whatever work topics that they feel is relevant to them. What's interesting about the Learning Out Loud circles is that all these people do not know one another. They come from different business areas. And my colleagues have told me that during online or this lockdown period, when you actually want to create serendipity, corridor type, meaningful conversation, those Learning Out Loud circles suddenly help us to connect people in ways that they could not have imagined or would not even happen in normal times.
Agreed. Bonnie, I just want to kind of then move on to looking at what's worked and what hasn't. So with these experiments, what's been received well, what's resonated well, what are the learnings here, the takeaways and the next steps for you, especially when you're so positive about this approach? How do you embed that in others so that it's kind of transitioned within the organization?
I think this is such a great question. So my challenge is like this year is experiment year. So what I learned is that by giving people this kind of immersive experience, they really get it. People not just come to the session and immediately after the session, they will say, Bonnie, can I do it in my next meeting? I say, when's the next meeting? They say, in an hour. So you can see that because we're talking about learning in the flow of work. If people actually want to do it, not to come to a so-called training session, but actually do it in the work, I see that as a success. So those materials, they are just guidance in terms of thinking about how you do work. And they are immediately made available. And the person, more than one, they actually just take the materials, they say, Bonnie, I'm going to apply it in an hour's time. So I think I would say that it's a huge success. The drawback is, of course, how do we scale, right? So initially, this group of people, they are there because they're converts, or they are dragged there because other colleagues highly recommend. So it's kind of word of mouth. More and more people come to the water cooler session. I do need to think about in terms, how do we scale it? How do we make it part of how do we embed into more and more of the business process? Whether you're organizing a town hall or are you having a team meeting or a project meeting? How can we actually bring those habits, make it natural? It becomes work ritual. I think that would be the aspiration and the next step as we go into the 2021.
Just before we close off then, that next step is great, but looking at scalability, I mean, it's a whole different kettle of fish, right? But how do we go and where do we go with scalability here within an organization?
I think this will be a lot of the traditional, both top-down and grassroots, because if people actually experience it and like it, and you need to make the tools, the materials immediately accessible and easily kind of grab and go so that you can use for your next meeting. That's one way. The other way is, of course, through proper planning, that you can comb through different business area, making sure that this has been properly introduced, but where possible, built into all the business meetings, anything that people experience. If they can try out different bits and pieces of the habits, it just becomes part of the work. So from my experience,
it can become organic.
A lot of word of mouth, but you do want to go through some of the official channels as well, because as people experience them in those official channels, which tend to involve a lot of people, and if they love it, the next thing I get is they raise their hand and say, Bonnie, can I actually replicate? So I think there's a scalability in that sense as well. Go where the energy is, but you need to kick off through those formal channels, so first it's been endorsed, second that people have immersed and have felt it themselves, so that you create the demand, and so they can run.
Yeah, the internal buy-in that you've mentioned there and that endorsement is incredibly important, isn't it? So Bonnie, we're going to be wrapping up now, which is a shame, but I just want to kind of reinstate to everyone attending that please reach out to Bonnie, LinkedIn, follow up with her with regards to questions or connections, collaborations, etc. I would really just reinforce that message. And really, I just want to thank Bonnie and all of our speakers and contributors today. That was our final presentation of the day. So special thanks to our sponsors, Barco, Nintex and Whatfix. And on behalf of everyone here on the Exchange Network, thank you for attending, and hopefully we'll be back for Corporate Learning 2021. So Bonnie, thank you very much for your time. Is there any final word from you before we close off?
I just want to say thank you. I don't expect to have so many great questions. I'm seeing the panel. I wish I can answer all of them, but do stay in touch. I think it's a fascinating area, and I think as L&D, we are still trying to figure that out. I think we can be open and challenge ourselves and our status quo. I think remember that the world of work is shifting between those contexts. Let's make sure that we don't get fixated in one way of working. Yeah. And be open and explore, and love to explore together with all of you. Do stay in touch and get connected.
Bonnie, Cheuk, thank you very much for your time, and to everyone else, thank you and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.